I'm going to start this by saying I have the deepest respect for nurses. I myself am a frequent flyer in the city hospital, and I know firsthand how hard they work and how underappreciated they are. This story is not about the good nurses, though. So Easter weekend a few years ago, before COVID, my much-loved mother suffered a ruptured brain aneurysm. Blessedly, an Army medic happened to be shopping at the same store when she collapsed. He had his medikit in his car and was able to fast-track her vitals and information while we waited for the emergency medical technicians. His speedy action saved her life. Emergency life-saving surgery on Easter Sunday morning was followed by amazing care in the ICU for the next month. When Mom was deemed stable, she was moved to a regular bed in the BCU brain care unit. This is where our hell began. Once Mom was in her room, I took up residence. Since I was the sibling with the free days, I would arrive at 8:30 a.m. and stay with Mom until 5 p.m. every day to keep her company and be a liaison between family and medical peeps. The head nurse, henceforth known as Skank, was less than pleased to see me there every day. She told me she was used to patients' families visiting for an hour or two and then going home, said with much emphasis. Apparently, having me there every day cramped her style, and I soon found out why. Week 1, Mom was still only semi-conscious, waking for a few moments to look for me and then drifting off again. Whenever she needed help that I was unable to do, I would page for a nurse and be told be there in a few. Rinse and repeat with me getting pissed after an hour had passed and my mother was in distress. It got so bad she had open wounds on her legs from laying in stuff. Finally, after this happened 3 or 4 times, I stormed down to the nurse's station to find them sitting around laughing, chatting, and eating cookies while the patient call bells went off. Cookies, while my mother and other patients needed tending to. I glared at them and said, I realize you are entitled to breaks, but I paid for help for my mother over an hour ago. Do you suppose one of you can tear yourselves away and help the semi-conscious patient in room 2.4? After much huffing, muttering, and a few guilty looks, one of them detached herself from the tea party and went to Mum. The head nurse came up to me with steam coming out of her ears. Now listen, that is not how we do things here. Your mother isn't even aware of us coming and going, so it isn't a big deal for her to wait. My mother may not be aware, as you say, but she knows when she's uncomfortable, and I'm aware. So as long as you do your damn job, we will be getting along just fine. Week 2. Mum had a roommate we shall call Beckylo. Beckylo had been there for 2 or 3 months waiting for a placement in a permanent residence. She was a favorite with the nurses, and she clearly resented having to share what she considered to be her room, frequently walking past Mum and I and glaring at us while muttering foul words under her breath. After a week, Beckylo got louder and more vocal in her hostility. I mentioned it to the head nurse and was shut down with a shrug and, oh, that's just Beckylo. It all came to a head one spring day when good old Becky came storming into the room, screaming and swearing. She shoved Mum's wheelchair out of the way. Mum was in bed, fortunately, and started tearing stuff off the walls, throwing chairs, kicking furniture while screaming and swearing at the top of her voice. I paged a nurse, was scared to leave Mum with Becky raging. The nurse came and shrugged and walked out. I was pissed. I turned to Becky the nut and told her to keep it down, that she wasn't alone in the room. Next thing I knew, Beckylo was sitting on her bed on her phone. At least, she was quiet, right? Wrong. What she said next still scares me and pisses me off at the same time. I remember it word for word as it's burned into my mind. Yep, the mother. Yep, the daughter. Kill the witches. I froze. Here was my mother, semi-conscious, strapped to a bed, completely helpless in getting death threats from her freak of a roommate. Becky hung up her phone and huffed off to who knows where, leaving her side of the room tossed. I paged for a nurse and got a different one. When she came, I told her what happened and to let the head nurse know I planned to stay the night. I was told that wasn't allowed. I was done. Stormed down to the nurse station and started rising hell. My mother just got death threats from her insane roommate. What do you plan to do about it? Oh, that's just Beckylo. You have to excuse her. The hell I will. My mother is barely conscious and completely unable to defend herself or call for help. She needs to move to a new room now. We don't move patients. You have to accept things as they are. What the hell is that supposed to mean? I'm going to give you 2 choices. Either you find a new place for my mother where she won't be in danger while she sleeps, or I go upstairs to the director of this hospital and tell him all about the shit you and your staff are pulling with your patients. Insert shocked Pikachu face here. Oh. Well, maybe we could move her to 2.7. Do it. Do it. You have 5 minutes to get things started or I go upstairs. It took them less than that to begin moving Mum and her stuff to the new room. Once she was settled and comfortable, one of the nurses stayed behind. After making sure Skank wasn't nearby, she told me what set Beckylo off in the first place. Turns out Becky had to have a nurse go with her to have a cigarette. She wanted to smoke, but the nurses were all too busy to spend half an hour outside babysitting Becky-lo. Insert resulting rage here. I made sure Mom was safe and comfortable and went home for the weekend. Other family was with her on weekends to give me a break. Monday morning, I received a call from Mom's hospital social worker. Here, each patient has a social worker assigned to them to be an advocate for their care. The worker explained that Skank tried to lodge a complaint against me about my, as she called it, unnecessary and unacceptable rage on Friday. Could I come in and talk to her about it? No problems. I went to her office and we sat down, and I told her all about the past 2 weeks and all the nonsense the nurses were pulling in the BCU. She was pissed. First, she told me she was glad my mom had someone so fierce to protect her. Then she asked me for permission to talk to the hospital director about my mom, her case, and what happened. No problems. A few days later, several suits and the social worker could be seen by the nurse station, then escorting Skank away for a chat. She kept her job, but the rest of the time Mom was there, she was exceedingly polite to both of us and actually avoided me if possible. Later, the BCU was dinged by the health dept because of poor hygiene practices, with the nurses resulting in an outbreak of Mrs. But that's another story. Happened roughly 4 years ago now. I've been out of this for 2 years. So, my high school used to have this kind of support group set up on Mondays. It'd be for people with mental illness, self-diagnosed and official. Tuesdays, people with disabilities. Wednesdays, people of the Elgbut 2. Thursdays were foster care adoptions, broken homes. And Fridays was venting day where anyone who needed support could just come vent to an adult. These were mostly run by the school guidance counselors who, well, mandatory reporters, are also completely confidential and weren't allowed to tell your parents anything, just doctors, police, and ACT, not parents. I can say I attended many group days, but for the purpose of the story, we are talking about Tuesdays. I have optic nerve hypoplasia. In other words, my optic nerve is too short in my left eye, and I have no vision. I attended the group because it was the only way I found people who knew how hard it was to function day to day with no depth perception. It was little things, not being able to throw or catch well or pour things easily, constantly falling down the stairs. Small things that me and many lazy eyes had in common, and it was so freeing to have someone to talk to. Then a girl named Jessica joined the group. Jessica was in a wheelchair, and surprisingly was the first wheelchair user we had had in my time there. We all tried to help her out. In the morning, one of us would get the key to the elevator for her since it was up a flight of stairs, so she couldn't get the key to use the key. She seemed nice, but after a week she started making small digs at people in the group about how our disabilities weren't that bad or our complaints were kind of sad. We tried to ignore it. The counselors told her no one's complaints were sad. Everyone had problems, but she didn't stop. One day we all decided to talk for a few minutes about our specific disabilities. The counselor said it'd be fun if we could all give mini presentations to the group about our disabilities, and that those with the same condition should pair up, and maybe we could even present them to the school. I paired up with 2 people. Let's say Jack and Jill. They also had the same problem. We all only had it in one eye, though with some minor vision problems in the other eye. We put together a presentation about everything we knew, from potential causes, to lack of a way to fix it, to our everyday struggles and how we adapted. We gave our presentation and then asked if anyone had questions, and Jessica raised her hand and said, "So you can walk, talk, see, hear, how exactly is missing just one eye a disability? You have all 4 limbs and can do anything you want." It took a moment for me to regain composure before I responded, "I can't do everything. I'm not allowed to drive heavy machinery. I can't drive for work. I can't be a pilot, can't be police or firefighter, can't do delivery work. And in many stores, I can't work due to equipment needed to unload trucks and stock shelves. When picking a career in future, I have to look so deeply into the job to ensure I won't hurt myself or anyone else. I'm disabled. It's an invisible disability, but it is a disability." She had scoffed, and one of the counselors had pulled her out to talk to her, but unfortunately, during the next presentation, that didn't stop her. The next one was about a girl who was born deaf. She had cochlear implants so she could hear, but she's still deaf without them, still disabled. At the end, Jessica raised her hand and said, "You don't really belong here, though. You can hear just fine now and you can do everything, can't you?" The girl wasn't a pushover, though, and I guess after seeing Jessica to us was ready, "No, there are still things I can't do. Some technology interfere with my implants, and so I can't work with. My hearing is so sensitive compared to yours that I have constant headaches, so only wear my implants for a short bout of time a day, which means my job can't require 8 or more hours of hearing. I'm still disabled, and if my implants get damaged, I will be stuck unable to hear for a long time." The counselor dragged Jessica out again, and that time she didn't come back. We didn't see her again in the group. We saw her around school, but her cousin got the key for her from then on. The counselor apologized to us for the problems and we'd finished presentations, but a day that was supposed to be fun to learn in depth about each other's problems was soured by her entitlement to decide what is and isn't a disability. I work weekends at a local brewery. I am fortunate that I do not need the money, but it gives me something to do because my wife works a ton of hours in the medical world, and I find it to be a good way to engage with people while also being forced to be out and about instead of sitting at home bored. I made the mistake of communicating that this was not a necessity job for me to a coworker, Elle. Elle got distant then, and where we chatted a lot prior, Elle started being weird. No big deal. I'm not here for Elle. Well, soon after that, I had a large group come in, and Elle took one of 3 $100 bills off of the table and pocketed it that was meant as a tip for me. This group stayed all day to watch a tournament. They were there from 8am. I did confront him, and he denied it. He swore up and down he would never do that. But he was the only one in the party room other than me. It wasn't worth raising a stink because this guy doesn't do well financially, and I know he struggles to pay his rent. I maintained being cordial with Elle to the point that he must have thought we were back to how it used to be, but I just didn't really give a shit. Fast forward to the beginning of last month, and Elle lets everybody know he is going and working at a place on the tourist strip. His last day came that I was working with him, which happened to be a Saturday, and I overheard him admit to another employee not only that he took the 100, but that he regularly took his bus fare from my tables if they tipped cash, and he was laughing it off because I didn't need it. I was miffed. The other employee came and told me that he said that, which was cool, but I said not to worry about it, and I appreciated her telling me. Here's the revenge. First, it's important to know that the rule at the brewery is that all servers have to have a manager approve all final bills and cash out all former employees to combat internal theft. Second, I only work weekends, but the brewery planned a nice little going-away cheers for Elle on his final day, which was a Monday. The day after I heard Elle's confession to stealing from me, I had a short shift. I bought a gift card from the brewery. They're supposed to be no less than $10, but I rang one for 75 cents. I then wrote 75 on a sticky note and stuck it to the gift card, which I put in a dollar store. Good luck. Greeting card.
I didn't sign it.
The managers already had a nice little gift bag for Elle in their office, and I stuck my card with the gift card on top of that gift bag, and it just said Elle's name on the envelope of the card. I had the next weekend off, which is when Elle came in with a date. As it was told to me, Elle and his girlfriend both ate and had a couple of beers, and when he tried to pay the manager with his gift card, he was about $74.25 short, and his date walked out and Elle had to call his dad to pay his bill. I hope you enjoyed all my tip money, Elle. Many years ago, I worked in a group home. For the privacy of all the residents, we had a set visitation room with visitation hours by appointment only. Appointment only so that 2 families weren't trying to visit at the same time. It had a separate entrance and a door that shut it off from the rest of the house. It had a half bath, a TV, cable hookup, game console, maybe 50 games, DVD player, and about 150 movies, board and card games, along with nice comfy seating and a small 4-person table. Visitors were not allowed anywhere but that room if any of the other residents were home. It didn't matter if Bill wanted to show off his new bedding set or if Jack's mom wanted to see if he needed new clothes. If the other residents were home, no. The families of 5 of the residents were fine with it. Kyle's mother and grandmother were not. They firmly believed they were within their rights to enter the rest of the house and inspect it and his housemates. He was their baby and they had rights by God. Actually, no. The residents of this home were 40-year-old men with developmental and physical disabilities. They were all actually wards of the state. The fact they were even allowed to know where he was, let alone visit, was a huge privilege. Our agency had many other homes where the families of the residents had no idea where they were and weren't allowed to see them. The families were only allowed to contact the case manager and inquire about them. Back to Kyle's mom and grandma. It was a constant battle to keep them out of the rest of the house. It got to the point that we had to have an extra staff member during their visits. They had to sit outside the connection door while the visits were going on and physically stand blocking their way when they would attempt to enter. I lost track of how many times we ended up calling the police to have them removed from the main part of the house before that happened. That's when they started calling the police on us. After the 3rd time of them calling the police to demand entrance to the rest of the house, they lost their privilege of visiting. Kyle was moved to another home where they weren't allowed to know the address. This didn't go over well, to put it nicely. They were adamant Kyle was still in our home and they threatened us several times that we would pay for keeping their baby from them. A restraining order was granted against them, keeping them 800 feet from the house staff, residents, and no calls to the house. It all came to a head one night when at dark 30, I was locking up the house for the night. All doors and windows had to be checked and the alarm set. Another staff was doing bedtime medicine. The other two were helping out with bedtime routines, getting laundry going. I kept telling the other staff I smelled smoke, like a campfire, just faint whiffs of it. They said I was crazy. I had just walked the entire house and nothing was burning. It must be a neighbor having a small backyard fire or something, and I got a whiff while closing the windows and it was stuck in my nose. It finally was strong enough for the others to smell. In pairs, we checked the house again. Nothing but the smell is getting stronger. We met back in the living room and decided to go ahead and call the fire department when we realized we could see wisps of smoke in the living room. We woke the residents and had them put on shoes and jackets. The smoke in the living room was now clearly visible and starting to make its way towards the bedrooms, and it triggered the alarms. Finally, protocol was to evacuate and get the residents to the van. The living room was the exact center of the house with an open floor plan with the kitchen on one side and a laundry room on the other. The bedrooms were through the living room and to the left and right along with the two bathrooms, the visitors' room and our office being at opposite ends of each other. Down the hall, we shuffled to our office because the van was parked to that side and the keys in the office. As we came around the corner of the house, we saw the source of the smoke. Our front porch is on fire. The house was brick, which is what was preventing it from spreading outward, but it was spreading upward towards the roof. The police and fire departments arrived just as we reached the van. Fire department went to work on the house and the police headed towards us. We're all fine, except 4 people came running up to us. Kyle's mother and grandmother, along with 2 unknown men. The 2 women started screaming for Kyle and they were here to rescue him. We had endangered him by allowing him to live in a fire trap. They suddenly realized there was no Kyle in the group and were now screaming that we had left him to burn in that house. They were suing us. They would shut us down and have us in prison for murder. The police quickly asked if we had left someone behind, to which we answered no. We have all 6 men, but for their safety, we had to get them in the van, and then we would sort this out. The police held mother and grandmother back from us, while they continued to shriek about Kyle and we had left him to die. 2 of the staff loaded them while me and my coworker talked to the police, starting with the fact those 2 women had a restraining order, and for his safety and ours, Kyle had been moved to a location unknown to them. They were cuffed immediately and told to pipe down. We proceeded to explain what had transpired that evening. The fire was doused quickly while we did this. One of the firemen came over to talk to the officers, and we heard him say there was preliminary evidence this fire was set deliberately. There would be a formal investigation. Kyle's mother and grandmother were arrested for violating the restraining order and suspicion of arson. The 2 men were arrested on suspicion of arson also. Results of the investigation determined a clear case of arson. There was also a deliberate rigging of a device to the door leading out of the visitation room that would have been fatal to the person opening the door, and if anyone was close by, debilitating, if not fatal. The 4 were indicted on vandalism, arson, 8 counts of attempted homicide, 2 counts attempted murder. It came out they were unaware of the other side door, which saved lives. They got a plea deal and got 7, 10 years each. This was back in the early 2000s, so I don't remember what exactly the sentence was. Back in 2019, Target decided to run a pre-Black Friday's 3-day event 2 weeks before the actual event. This was supposed to help break up the shoppers and make Black Friday easier. On the last day of the event, I was forced to work a 14-hour day because my closer called off. Luckily, my district manager let me go home an hour earlier and managed to switch my shift the next day so I could sleep. I told Target management about what was going on, and they were pretty understanding with it. Also, my district manager made sure that everyone knew that once our departments were closed on the last day, that we cannot offer any kind of extensions to the promos. Target and my company made it very clear that because this event was being advertised everywhere, that people would find out quickly and have ample amount of time to come in. Quitting time hits, and I put up the sign that states that we are now closed and what are the times we normally work. Just to make it clear, normal hours state that we close at 8, and I was leaving at 7. 9:30 rolls around, and I'm at home watching a movie trying to sleep when my work phone goes off. I answer, and here's how the conversation went. Hello? Hello? Is this the mobile guy at Target? Karen asks. Yes, it is. How can I help you? Well, I came in today to upgrade my phone with you guys because of the deals you had on. I saw that no one was here, but one of the Target managers gave me your number because she said you left work early and told me to see if you could help out. At this point, I thought that the lady showed up before our closing time and decided to go home and call me after she got my information. If that was the case, I'd give her number to my manager and have him find a solution. Sure, let's see what I can do. Can you tell me what time you came into the store? Of course, I showed up at 8:30. Oh, well, I'm sorry, ma'am, but you showed up 30 minutes after closing time. There is nothing I can do on my side because our hours are posted up in store, and I know the advertisement stated our hours of operation during the event. But the manager here said you left early, so you need to help me. Again, you showed up 30 minutes after close. Even if I stayed the whole day, you still would have missed me. I do know that Black Friday will have these deals again, so you can always come back. No, I'm here now and you will come here and help me or I will get you fired. Ma'am, I don't take threats well and will not deal with this. I don't even have to be talking to you now because I'm off the clock, but I did out of the kindness in my heart, which was the wrong move. Come back on Black Friday if you don't, then that's not my problem. I hang up the phone and continue to watch the movie. 30 minutes later, and after a few missed calls from Karen, I get an email from the Target manager, which goes as follows. Hey, I know it's after hours, but I have a lady here who said she came in after you left. She called you and said you were being rude. I just want to help because you did leave a bit earlier than normal and would like for you to call me so we can come up with a solution. Here's my number. So I sighed and gave her a call. When she answered, I told the manager about the conversation the lady had with me, and explaining the time that the lady told me she came in, I told her to check the cameras to make sure of the time. I also told her about what corporate said about not extending the deal, and how there is nothing my district manager or myself can do. She thanked me for calling and explaining what was going on and told me that it would be taken care of. We hung up, and I pass out for the night. The next day, the manager who I called asked to talk to me in her office. I agreed and followed her there. When we got there, she explained that after we hung up, she told Karen about the policy corporate made and how because she showed up late, that there is nothing she can do. Karen hated that answer and started yelling obscenities to the point that security had to escort her out. As far as I could tell, she never came back on Black Friday, and I thankfully never heard from her again. So I work as a medical professional and specialize in pediatrics. As such, I have made sure that my office is as child-friendly as possible. I keep a bag of toys in my room to keep them entertained, distracted, and have a variety of stickers to give children as a reward for being brave or just generally pleasant. I like to try and give them a positive experience, as I know that medical consultation rooms can be fantastically intimidating, especially when the professional seeing you is a complete stranger wearing gloves, mask, etc. Anyhow, I see my fair bit of challenging children, but I don't mind. It is part of the job, and it can sometimes be quite funny. I find that most naughty children are generally okay when you pay attention to them, but the worst offenders are the children of entitled parents, the kind of children who have never once heard the word no from anyone and who are completely used to getting their own way. Hence this story. Me, child, and entitled mom. So as I come out of my office to introduce myself to the child, approximately 6 years old, and his mother, I can see that the child has been wreaking absolute havoc in the waiting area. Information brochures and leaflets have all been thrown on the floor. There is a decent-sized puddle next to the water cooler. The receptionist was going absolute mad trying to stop the child stealing patient records from behind her desk. Mom was sitting there playing on her phone, absolutely oblivious. So I call them both into my room, and Mom walks in, face still glued to her phone, whilst her son races in at 100 mph, nearly wiping out some expensive equipment. After a few minutes of getting the child to calm down somewhat, and getting the mother to look up from her phone for a few minutes, I was able to start my observations and do some tests. All of a sudden, the child literally snatches a piece of equipment out of my hand. Me. Excuse me, young man, but can I have that back, please? Child. No, it's mine. Very funny. I am afraid that it actually belongs to me. I need it so I can make sure you are healthy. No, it's mine now. I'm sorry, but it is a very expensive piece of equipment. Can I have it back? Nope. Nope. You can't have it. Excuse me. The mom doesn't look up from phone. Excuse me, Mrs. X. No response. Excuse me. Me shouting suddenly got her attention. Entitled mother, what do you want? Can you ask your son to give my equipment back? It is very expensive and delicate. Why did you give it to him in the first place? I didn't. He ripped it out of my grasp. My son would never do anything like that. I didn't see it happen, so you must be wrong. Can you just ask him to give it back? She starts huffing and puffing. Sweet, can you give that equipment back to the doctor? Instead of handing it back, the child throws the item over the room. Luckily, I was close enough to catch it. Young man, that behavior is not acceptable and really naughty. Entitled mother, excuse me, but what do you think you are telling off my child? I am not having anyone intentionally damage the expensive equipment here. You shouldn't tell him off. He was only playing. I'm not going to argue about this. I think it is time for you to leave. What? What? Why are you kicking out my son? It is very simple. He has caused absolute chaos since walking in the front door and due to your inability to actually supervise him. He snatched a $2,000 instrument from my hand and launched it across the room. It doesn't matter. Your practice can just buy another one. It doesn't belong to the practice. It belongs to me personally. I don't see the issue. I'm sure you wouldn't be happy if I billed you for the replacement or if I rocked up to your house and started throwing $2,000 of your belongings around the house. But that is different No, it isn't. Will you please take your son and leave, please? Feel free to book in with my colleague, but I will not see your son again. At this point, Mom drags her child out to the front desk to book in with my colleague. As I go to write my notes, I realize that a small but moderately expensive $400 piece of equipment has disappeared from my desk. It turns out that whilst I was arguing with the mom, the child had pocketed this equipment whilst I wasn't looking. I stormed out to the front and managed to get the child to hand over this piece of equipment, whilst the mother protested that her son wasn't a thief. Once this was all done, I returned to my office, only to have the mom walk in, bearing in mind the door was closed. A minute later, me. Why are you here? I asked you and your son to leave. Entitled Mother. I notice in the waiting area that other children have been given stickers by their doctors. I wanted to know why my son didn't get one. I only give them to children who behave. My son didn't do anything wrong. You have got to be joking. You're just snooty and don't want kids in your practice. You are being cruel not giving him a sticker. I don't care. Get out of my room now. After a standoff of nearly 30 seconds, Mom relented and stormed out of the practice, screaming and shouting to anyone who would listen that she was never going to bring her son back to see me again. I mean, works for me. Working with the public, very little surprises me. But what I just could not fathom is why Mom thought her son's behavior was appropriate, to have such little regard for others' belongings, and to have such little interest in actually supervising her son was pretty insane. To top it off, it was the fact that she was demanding some form of reward for his behavior. Glad she is going elsewhere. So, for context, I work for a local tow truck company as the manager in the roads outside our city. Up the hills are famous for being tricky and full of deadly turns to drive on. We are a busy company, especially during heavy rain periods, where the roads are almost impossible to ride with cargo trucks. The owner of the company is a sweet old lady, and she does her best to help the truck drivers have the best time possible during this situation. We let them buy coffee and snacks in the stops on us, and they are very grateful for it. The costs are honestly not too high, especially because our contracts are quite hefty. Dues, said roads, plus the many other regular people who don't know better how to drive there. Every week I go to the local truck stops to confirm how much we have to pay them all. I could do that by just a couple phone calls or messages, but if I have a chance to leave that office, I'll take it in a heartbeat. The workloads can be downright cruel sometimes, so that's a good break for me and the owner doesn't mind at all. I'm known there to be the person who pays for the truckers' coffee and food, and while I always say that's the company paying for it, they are very grateful anyway, plus we treat them with dignity and respect they deserve, so that's another big plus. There was a day last year in the middle of summer, a big storm going on that swamped me with work. I had to help our 22 drivers to locate and retrieve people's cars, constantly receiving calls for help, so much so that dread noise stills hammer my head to this day. I had an assistant, but even so, it was way too much for only 2 people to handle. We spent from 5 a.m. to 5 a.m. breaking our backs and minds that day. The road is even worse, so we had to work overnight then at 5 a.m. I was leaving home to rest, and the owner said she could cover the weekly visit to the stops. I thanked her but told to not care about one stop in particular because it was on my way home. Our office is located some miles off our city. Once I arrived at my regular stop to get a most earned mountain of food and so much coffee, it could thicken my blood. I was met by all the regulars, talked with everyone about the crazy storm, and chit-chatted while my order was being done. It arrived and I was feasting on it. Then I hear a loud man yelling something in the lines of, "What do you mean you can't help me?" "This is your job," to the cashier. I look back and tell myself, what a crazy jerk. It was Roger, fake name. He keeps screaming with the cashier about something with the tires of his car, so I block the noise of my mind to finally eat my sustenance deed for an entire family. Then I hear a sharp and annoyed "hey you" coming from behind me. I thought I was in the way of someone to catch one of the condiments close me. So I say my bad, push the basket with them aside, and keep eating. Then I hear a loud stomp and someone, Roger, pulling me by my shoulder, yelling at me, "Fire that awful employee immediately." I was still using my officer badge and clothes, so it is understandable Roger confused me with the manager. But I was just about over one of the most stressful days of my life, and eating is sacred for me. So I simply released from his grip, turning back to my food, saying, "Go screw yourself." I could hear the cashier giggling and the owner, Bob, fake name, who happens to be behind the counter getting people's orders, giving a good loud laugh, then promptly telling, "I'm just a customer, and he's the one who runs business." Roger, is that how you run your business then? Letting rude, lousy cashiers treat your costumes as garbage and your other costumes harass me without consequences? Bob looks at me and says, "I'm terribly sorry you have to go through this op. I'll see the bad customer out." Roger gives the biggest gasp I ever saw. "How dare you? You let you staff and customers harass good people like this? I'm calling the police, and by the looks of your disgusting food, I bet your kitchen is dirty with rats and cockroaches. I'm calling health surveillance too. I took great offense with this. I told him this food was 1,000 times better than whatever his wife does to him. Roger went into a bursting rage, threatening to get physical with me and yelling some very ruder words to me. But something Roger didn't realize is the restaurant was also full of truckers who were watching their friends being harassed. Some got up to defend us. And while we were in the middle of the confusion, I hear a rough "Hey jerk, get the hell out of here." And when I look back, there was these 3 angry guys, each one with mechanical tools on their hands and one with a fire axe looking like they were ready to kill. My heart skipped a beat and I froze in place with the sight of the axe. And that seems to have convinced Roger too, because he started walking quite hastily outside yelling about calling the police. The truckers were behind him telling they would chop his limbs off if he ever comes back. Everything eventually went back to normal and Bob even let me get that meal for free for all that trouble. Thank you, Bob. The police arrived later. We explained everything that happened. They asked if Bob wanted to press charges and he simply said yes. If I can get anything from this is have the right friends, everyone, and be kind with truckers. They're a crazy bunch.